Hi, and welcome to another narration presented by yours truly, Cryptids Roost. Please be so kind as to throat punch the like button, and don't forget to smack the ass of that subscription button as well. Plus, don't forget to share the video. Share it as far and wide as you can. This will help with YouTube's algorithm and will help promote the channel more. If you would like to support the channel and help make it grow, all donations can be made to paypal.me/cryptidsroost and will be gratefully received. If you enjoy listening to the following story, be sure to pop over to the author's Reddit profile and drop them a line, or even give them a glowing review. The link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. And don't forget to check out our merch store. If you would like an honourable mention, send in a snapshot of yourself with your purchase and I'll feature it in one of the videos. And if you're going to leave a dislike, please leave a comment as to why. That way I can see what you didn't like about the video, I can review it and possibly make changes in further videos. Thank you. And finally, have you written a creepypasta story you would like me to narrate for you? Have you had any cryptid sightings, paranormal or supernatural encounters, or even had any creepy or terrifying situations you'd like to share? If you wish to remain anonymous, that's fine with me. You can submit your stories and encounters to cryptidsroost@gmail.com. All the links again will be listed below. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not. A Vision of Rage. This fantastic story is written by Witchy Woman, a wonderful author over on Reddit's ScaryStories subreddit. Do you understand? I whispered as I leaned over my target. Do you understand all the rage that's been built up over the years? Yes, I understand. I can see it clearly now, he whimpered, trying desperately to close his eyes. Now, none of that, I crooned. You wouldn't want to miss out on any of the action, would you? Please let me close my eyes, he begged. But then you'd miss out of the best part, I informed him. Besides, I've already promised that this is going to be the last thing you'll see, ever. He started crying at this. What are you going to do to me? Please don't hurt me. We have to do just one last thing, then you can go, I promised as I reached for the eye drops. He started screaming when I tilted his head back and put the first drop in his eye. This particular request sat in my inbox for the best part of a year. I knew this one was going to be difficult to carry out. You see, most of my requests come from one individual, or at most a single family. This one came from an entire community, a very, very pissed off community, and justifiably so. I don't know who had the idea to contact me, but the request definitely was a community project. From the outset, there was nothing normal about this request. My typical requests ask for things like shit your pants terror, inflicting a little pain on someone, or causing someone to feel the same grief and despair their victims felt. This one wanted the target to understand the rage and despair that his policies caused his community to feel. My target was a well-known landlord who owned multiple properties, including half a dozen apartment complexes in the community, and he was famous for creating misery in his tenants' lives. He charges twice rent for the security deposit, tries to find loopholes to get out of having to follow the ADA and FHA, and increases rent for those with low credit scores, which is all of his tenants. He also rarely follows through on repairs needed for the buildings. Half of the houses have stoves and water heaters that don't work. The other half need major repairs to the properties. I don't know how, but he still manages to find a way to get every property rented out. Back to my mission. The community was fed up with the target and wanted him to understand their rage over his inequities and actually fix the problems, which is where I come in. I had to get a little creative with this one, as creating an understanding of rage isn't as easy as creating terror or grief in a target. By comparison, those are easy. This was going to take some planning and creativity. I started by researching the target's background. He came from a well-off family. I wouldn't call them rich per se, but they never had to worry about paying bills, putting food on the table, or even keeping a roof over their head. He was the last of 7 children and the favourite of his father. His father worked for an industrial parts manufacturer. He started at the bottom and worked his way into upper management, a path that the target followed, gaining the upper management position a decade earlier than his father. He purchased his first investment property at the age of 35 and rented it out to co-workers to begin with. After a couple of years, he invested in a second, then a third property until he owned 25% of the rentable homes and apartments in town. After looking into his background, I had to look into his personalities and quirks. I had an idea by this point of what would evoke emotions in him. He was unmarried, except to his bank account, and the only children he had were his stocks and bonds. This target had more gold than Scrooge McDuck and far fewer friends. I actually entertained the idea of labelling his file Ebenezer, just for the giggles the thought gave me. So having found out that this target loves his money, I started working on a plan. The way I figured it, the best way to achieve my goal and satisfy the request would be to set up a trust account that the target could not access, specifically for repairs and maintenance of the properties, refund the tenants who were grossly overcharged, and set up a manager for the rental properties so that he cannot make any changes to the rent amounts, as well as keeping the rent at a fair rate for the area and income of the tenants. The hard part, ironically, was forging the documents in a realistic way. I've done power of attorneys before, but a POA can be revoked and the changes undone if you have the resources to contest them in court. No, this time the papers had to look as though they'd come directly from him if my plan was to stick. So I set about obtaining the necessary documents, charitable trust account setup, transfer of funds, sale of stocks and bonds, set up a trust attorney to manage the trust account, property management, attorney in perpetuity for the trust, power of attorney in perpetuity for the property management company, and refunds for the tenants. It took longer to get a few samples of his signature than it did to draw up the documents. I wanted a few samples of his signature in order to bring authenticity to the forgeries. People naturally have minute differences in their signatures, and having multiple identical signatures on legal documents tends to look suspicious. As I was setting up the documents, I was also planning when I was going to carry out my plan. You see, in order to succeed in my mission, I needed to plan everything down to the minute. So I set up everything to be executed on a specific day at a specific time, and the clock was ticking. Once I had everything set up, it was time to work on catching the target. This was the tricky part. He rarely did the same thing 2 days in a row, and he never kept the same schedule 2 weeks in a row. Chalk one up for paranoia. One thing I could count on, though, was for him to come whenever I asked if it involved making more money. So, 2 days before I set up everything to go down, I called him, sounding as businesslike as I could. I asked him to meet me at the local coffee shop to go over some potential investments. I ordered a couple of drinks while I waited. Then I set myself up in a corner that allowed for full view of the lobby and watched for him to come in. When he came in, I stood and beckoned him over. "Hi Charles, how are you doing?" he asked, not my actual name. "It's been a good day," I replied. "I hope you don't mind, but I ordered you a black coffee, since you seem like a man who's not into the frilly stuff. Black coffee's perfect, thank you, he responded, grabbing the cup and down in half in one go. You said you wanted to discuss some potential investments? Yeah, I was looking at your profile of my investment firm, and I saw that you're pretty heavy into real estate. I was wanting to know how you felt about purchasing commercial real estate. I've never thought about commercial real estate. Is it really worth the investment? He was starting to feel drowsy and slightly slurring his words by this point. Damn, why am I so tired all of a sudden? He asked, picking up his coffee and finishing it. When his eyes began to roll back in his head, I knew it was time to go. Come on, it's time to get you home, I said, standing up and walking around towards him. I helped him stand and guided him to the door. Once outside, I turned towards my vehicle. My car is over there, on the other side, he protested, stopping and turning away from where I was leaving him. You're in no state to drive, my friend, I reassured him. I'll drive you home and take a cab back here to pick up your car. Okay, sounds like a good idea, he mumbled as he continued towards my vehicle. Wait, do you know where I live? He asked. I'll get your address from your driver's license once we get you into the car, I told him. You don't have to worry about anything except taking a nap once you sit down. Okay, he agreed, sinking into the back seat of the vehicle, promptly falling over and starting to snore. I rolled my eyes and got into the driver's seat. It took just under 36 hours to get to my cabin in the desert. Now you might wonder why I chose to carry out my missions in the desert instead of a forest or other secluded locations. The answer is simple: visible isolation and lack of hiding places. Early in my career, I was not as thorough about incapacitating my targets, and I had a couple of targets manage to get out of their fetters. I was in the woods with the first one, and it took nearly 2 weeks to track him down and recapture him. 2 weeks that I spent cursing the trees and vowing to set up shop in a more open area. It was after that mission that I moved to the desert. The second target that escaped was from my cabin in the desert, and that target taught me the value of visible isolation. That target got out of the cabin and was about 30 feet into the scrubland before all hope left them, and they just collapsed and gave up. That was a valuable lesson to learn. It's been a couple of decades since I've had a target try to escape, but I've never forgotten my early lessons and have maintained my cabin in the desert, even though there are locations more central to the territory I cover. Location has more than compensated for the inconvenience. It took me about an hour to get him into the cabin and set him up in one of the rooms. Along with the wrist and ankle cuffs and the head, lap and chest straps binding him to the chair, this mission required me to put a couple of optometric speculums in his eyes to keep him from being able to close his eyes. Naturally, to prevent them from drying out, I applied saline drops every couple of minutes. I needed his vision intact. If you've never seen an unconscious person with their eyes open, it's a surreal experience. His pupils were dilated and his eyes tracked my movements without really focusing on me. It was a bit creepy if I'm honest. I heard him groan as I finished setting up. Good. I wasn't going to give him a counteractive medicine to make sure he was conscious in time, which was a relief. I was a little concerned that I'd miscalculated my timing. I put some saline drops in his eyes right as he started to come to. I had to take care to make sure I had the right vial. Don't want to use the other one too soon. It would ruin all of my careful planning. What's happening? Where am I? He asked groggily. You're at my place, friend, I told him. What's going on? Justice, my friend. On behalf of the people you've been doing wrong for many years. Why can't I close my eyes? He he asked, starting to sound just a tiny bit hysterical. I grabbed a hand mirror that I had set up on the table next to the chair and held it in front of him so he could see the bindings on him. "Who the fuck are you?" he nearly screamed. "I'm the instrument of justice," I informed him. "What are you talking about?" "Be patient, you'll see soon enough," I reassured him. "Speaking of seeing, I have an interesting slideshow for you." I drew his attention to the projector screen on the far wall and started going through the images. "All of these people are tenants of yours. I know you can't see their faces, that's for their safety. Just trust me in this," I said, starting to guide him through the slides. "This is one of the apartment buildings you own. As you can see, every apartment has water damage, peeling paint, black mould, and every one of them has drafts. This is another apartment building you own," I said, moving on to the next slide. "More of the same. Water damage, peeling paint, black mould, and half the appliances don't work. I honestly have no idea how you're able to get away with this and not get shut down by the health department." I won't bore you with details of every slide I showed him, just know it was repetitive with black mould, water damage, peeling paint, drafts, pests and non-working appliances in some combination. "And now the pièce de résistance," I said with a flourish, as I switched the projector over to my computer screen. I had multiple windows open to his bank accounts, his investments, the trust account that I had set up for his tenants along with the countdown timer. "What's this?" he demanded. "This is justice," I told him. "Just keep watching." The timer was at 1 minute left. "What are you doing?" he screamed, starting to sound pissed, exactly as I wanted him. "When the timer hits 0, money will be taken from your bank accounts, investments will be sold, and all of the money will go to an account that you will never have access to, thanks to some clever legal manoeuvring, in perpetuity. Not all the money will stay in that account though." Here, I leaned down to whisper in his ear. "Some of the funds will be given to your tenants as refund for overcharging their rent, as well as to repair the buildings and appliances you've been promising to repair." "What? Who the fuck do you think you are? When I get out of here, I will fucking sue you for everything you have," he screamed, spittle starting to fly from his mouth. He started struggling against the bindings, trying to rock the chair. Little did he know the chair was welded to the floor. It wasn't going anywhere. "Settle down and watch the screen. You'll miss the moment," I ordered. He stopped struggling and watched the screen with growing horror as the timer ticked away the last few seconds. Once the timer ticked 0, the totals in the 3 windows changed, but it was obvious that not all of the transferred money went to the third account. He let out a pure animalistic scream of rage, then started sobbing like a man, broken. I let him cry, scream, and attempt to throw himself around like an enraged chimpanzee. In the end, he was powerless and defeated. "Do you understand?" I whispered as I leaned over him. "Do you understand all the rage that's been built up over the years?" Yes, I understand. I can see it clearly now," he whispered, trying desperately to close his eyes. Now, none of that," I crooned. "You wouldn't want to miss out on any of the action, would you?" Please let me close my eyes," he begged. "But then you'll miss out on the best part," I informed him. "Besides, I've already promised that this is going to be the last thing you'll see. Ever." He started crying again at this. "What are you going to do to me? Please don't hurt me." "We had to do just one last thing, then you can go," I promised as I reached for the eye drops. He started screaming when I tilted his head back and put the first drop in his eye. This time, the drops were not saline. This time, they were a solution of 75% sulfuric acid. The smell was nauseating. and indescribable. The screams were piercing. I only needed one drop in each eye and about 30 seconds to dissolve the corneas and destroy the internal structures of his eyes. I immediately followed the acid drops with a stream of baking soda water to neutralise the acid. I didn't want to cause more damage than necessary, just enough damage to take away his sense of sight. Once the acid was neutralised, I rinsed his eyes with a cold saline solution to rinse away debris and any lingering acid or baking soda. By this time, he had lost consciousness, which was a blessing for him. He didn't want to feel what came next. Applied a couple of drops of lidocaine and an antibacterial ointment to his eyes, then removed the speculums as gently as I could. I'm glad I put some numbing solution on his eyes before I did this, because some tissue had melted around the metal, so removing them unfortunately took a little bit of tissue with them. I placed a couple more drops of lidocaine on his eyes, gently massaging the ointment around and taped his eyelids closed. Once I got his eyes closed, I placed gauze pads over them and started wrapping his head to keep them in place. Once I got him all wrapped up, I administered a sedative and started undoing the buckles holding him in place, leaving the chest strap for last. Before I undid the chest strap, I got the wheelchair that I kept on hand, then checked to make sure he was still breathing before transferring him. I situated him in the front passenger seat of my throwaway vehicle in order to be able to monitor him closely and administer additional sedative and pain medication as necessary. We had a long drive ahead of us, and I wanted him to be unconscious through the entirety of it. 30 hours after loading him into the car, I pulled up to the entrance of a hospital not far from his town. I didn't want to take him all the way back to his town. It would be too suspicious, especially with the chemical burns, since there was no industrial warehouses that use caustic chemicals. Here, at least, it would look less suspicious since there's a copper mine about 2 hours away, so the cover story of an industrial accident is plausible. I checked on my patient's breathing and made sure he was still unconscious. Then I put on my most panicked look I could, tousled my hair, and ran in through the doors yelling for a doctor. I was immediately greeted by a slew of nurses and a couple of security officers asking what was going on. I stopped and gasped up the story I fabricated about working on extracting copper sulfate from some low quality ore and having an accidental splash hit him in the face right as he took off his eye protection. Pouring baking soda water into his eyes to neutralise it, conveniently having some OxyContin and Valium on hand, doing a field bandage on him and racing over to get him to a doctor. The nurses immediately grabbed a stretcher and asked one of the security officers to come with us to move him from the car to the stretcher. I led them out to the ambulance bay and opened the door so they could take him into the ER. While they were distracted, I texted a picture of him as well as a picture of the contract with the property manager to the contact number I'd been given and got in my car and drove away. I don't know what his final disposition was, as my job was done, but I haven't heard anything about police looking for someone with information about his injuries and the person who caused them, nor did I hear anything from the contact number before I broke the phone and tossed it into multiple trash cans. On my way out of town, I dropped off the car at a junkyard, ensuring it was first on the list of vehicles to be crushed the next day. I walked a few blocks to get to the vehicle I'd stashed there and left. Justice has been served. For now.